Thank you so much for being on the programme. It's great to talk to you as always. And it feels like we're speaking at a really important time. Donald Trump in the White House. We've, of course, seen Keir Starmer's response to Southport. Populism is on the rise. Mistrust is on the rise. It feels like the world is slightly at a critical moment. Yeah. And it's something that you've been thinking about a lot. You're calling it the Great Division. Just explain what that is.
Yeah, Happy New Year, Sophie. Great Division, well, I think the world feels pretty fragile right now, economically, socially, politically. If you take Southport and the riots, that's in some ways the eruption of those divisions, a real earthquake on our streets in the UK. And the storm may well have been quelled on that front, but actually underlying that, there's been a shift in the climate of opinion in lots of communities right around the world. A sense of discontent, a sense of distrust, a questioning of multiculturalism in the deepest possible sense. And in this country, you know, the immediate response has done nothing to heal those societal wounds, to close those divides within and between communities. And until that happens, for me, it's hard to see how we go about tackling some of the greatest problems of our time, including low growth and including crumbling and in some cases rioting communities.
I'm really interested in what you're saying there, because this year we talked about Southport, obviously. We've also talked about the grooming gang scandal that people feel very angry about still. So do you feel that there is a justified anger, I guess, towards the establishment in the initial response to these things?
Yes, there's definitely anger. I think it's to a degree justified, because there has been a degree of willful blindness, Sophie, to some of those simmering tensions for a long time.
What do you mean by willful blindness?
Well, I think sometimes it's been difficult to question the cause of multiculturalism without being accused of somehow being racist or xenophobic. And for all that, multicultural communities bring great richness of ideas and cultures and practices. Unless you invest in the cohesion of those communities, you get the sort of things we see in Southport and across more than 30 places across the UK right now. We structurally underinvested in what's sometimes called the social capital of society, those bonds of trust and cohesion within our communities. Unless and until we start investing in those things, we're papering over the cracks.
You say that the policy response has been inadequate. Do you include the current government in that? The
Yes.
Labour government?
Yes. I mean, there's no long-term strategy as yet of helping bring those communities back together again. I mean, the simple, I would say simplistic response would be to close the door on immigration, stop the clock, turn back the clock, perhaps. For me, a better and more enlightened long-term response will be to build much stronger bridges of trust across the UK.
And what does that mean, build stronger bridges of trust?
Well, you take the places that rioted last year. It is no coincidence or surprise that they had suffered most from underinvestment in what you might call the social infrastructure of their communities. The parks, the youth clubs, the community centres, the theatres, the museums, the high streets, the things that make life worth living, the things that bring communities together. And if you cut back on those, as we have by between a third and a half over the last 15 years, those fractures, those ruptures build over time, and that is what's happened.
You say in the lecture you're giving, the Great Division could have the same impact as the Great Depression. I mean, the Great Depression was pretty bad, right?
Right.
So this is serious.
It is. I mean, we know quite a lot now about what those societal fractures do to our economy. They undermine growth. When trust is lost, when communities are built on shifting sands, it's devilishly difficult, if not impossible, to get growth going. In that sense, these social tensions aren't something, that's some nice to have. They are foundational to strong communities and therefore foundational to strong national economic growth. You look at the epidemic, for it is that, in mental health across the UK, particularly among younger people. That too is a reflection of what's sometimes called the antisocial century in which we now sit. All of these scourges, problems, economic and social, that we face require a firm societal base which does not currently exist.
It's interesting you're talking about growth there, because obviously growth's been pretty anemic and it's been a problem for this government as well as the last government, to say the least. The OBR could end up revising their forecast in March, which means Rachel Reeves could then be in a position where she either has to cut spending, raise taxes, or change her fiscal rules. So what should she do?
Yes, well, I think she should have really changed the fiscal rules once, in a broadly positive direction, I should say. The budget, I think last time we spoke, we were making the case for changing the rules. They'd change a bit.
She listened to your interview, obviously.
Well, not,
so be careful what you're going to say here. She might do the same
just
thing
in
this
case.
time.
Well, listen, that tweet was an improvement, but didn't go quite as far as I would have liked to open up the space to invest. And above all else, when the OBR opine in March, I think it would be deeply counterproductive to both growth and to the fiscal position, Sophie, if that led to a cutting back on investment and indeed in spending more generally. Then I think you really are into a doom loop between debt and growth, and that's a situation to avoid at all costs.
And the speculation is that she is going to cut spending. So there is a risk of this doom loop, as you call it.
Yeah.
Are you worried about it?
I think it's a matter of degree. It depends how much spending is cut, if indeed it is cut. For me, I think some of the gloom and doom about both the economy and in bond markets is slightly overdone right now. I think once we get into the second half of the year, the underlying fiscal picture may look somewhat better, as might the underlying growth picture. So anything precipitate now, I think, is best avoided.
So you think that they shouldn't panic by the market reaction to the budget then, is what you're saying?
Should definitely not panic.
There's speculation about a third runway at Heathrow. I mean, is that the kind of pro-growth measure that you'd welcome, or do you worry about it from a green perspective?
No, I think whether it's Luton or Gatwick or Heathrow, and I think the first two look like they're almost in the bag, we are congested in our current airport capacity, and this will be a way of demonstrating by deed, rather than just by word, what growth is all about. So yes.
You think that would be a good idea? I guess my other question as well is, there's been lots of speculation about whether the markets have lost confidence in Rachel Reeves. You think that's too far then? You think that's overblown? I
think that's overblown. I think we've seen a global reaction that's something of an overreaction in the early part of the year. Listen, this is what happens, right? Bond traders come back after Christmas. The bonus clock has started again. They put on some big bets. The story they carry in is growth's a bit weaker, inflation's a bit stickier, politics are a bit messier. And in the UK, growth is particularly low, inflation is particularly sticky, and politics, from what we thought was the case, had become a lot messier. That was the first 10-day response. I think we've seen a stabilisation and perhaps even the start of a walking back from that now. I think there's more of that to come.
The other big thing, of course, that is going to impact the UK economy is Donald Trump. And there's a range of opinion, I think it's fair to say, on exactly how that will happen. What's your assessment of what Donald Trump will mean for the UK?
Well, I think my hope is that it'll be far less adverse than is some of the commentary around what he might do right now. The mistake we made with Trump 1, I think, was to take his words literally but not seriously, whereas actually the way to read Trump is to take those words seriously but not literally. So on tariffs, for example, tariffs aren't Trump's favourite word in the English vocabulary. That's a different T word, Trump. So it's all about self-preservation. There's no way he would take actions that would create a growth or push up the cost of living in the US, I would think. But what this is an elaborate piece of game theory, if you like, to strike somewhat better deals on the trading stage and elsewhere. So I'm quietly, very quietly, optimistic that certainly some of the worst excesses that people are worrying about, higher inflation, lower growth, will be avoided. And actually, in things like taking an axe to regulation, thinking very differently about how government functions, there is a chance of real growth and supply side upside there from which we will all then benefit.
Do you think we should take a few lessons from Donald Trump then, potentially, over here?
Well, in one sense, yes. In this sense, lots of parts about UK PLC are not working right now. Lots of parts of our economy are not working as they wish. If we want them to function better, more effectively, more efficiently, more in a more growth-friendly fashion, we will need to disrupt them. Significant reform is needed of all sorts of parts of the UK economy. That requires a disruptor to enact that disruption, what's sometimes called creative destruction. They have that par excellence in Donald Trump and in Elon Musk. Who is the disruptor here to really make a lasting change, say, to public services? So far, I think they haven't revealed themselves.
I mean, I guess Nigel Farage might think he could enter that picture, being the disruptor.
Certainly that. Whether he has profound thoughts on public sector reform, I just generally do not know. But we do need to think somewhat differently than we have if we want different things than in the past to come to pass, including higher growth.
And then just finally, there's been an awful lot of debate about the Rachel Reeves budget, and that many of her, I guess, more recent coverage in the press has stemmed from that. What was your view on the tax changes in that budget? You know, there has been an argument made by some that that has stifled growth, that it has created difficulties in some companies.
Well, I mean, any tax rise is going to bruise someone, and in this case, the bruises were felt mainly by the business sector. I think there were mistakes in execution, but even larger mistakes in the communication around that budget. What is the single biggest barrier facing businesses at the moment? It is getting the people, getting the staff, and getting the skills. If you are to get the people and to get the skills, you need them to be healthy and well educated. So putting money into health and education, as the budget did, is pro-business, if not immediately, then over the medium term. Investing £100 billion more over the 5 years in infrastructure is pro-business. These are the arguments that were not put especially well at the time of the budget. Personally, I would not have loaded so much onto business at the budget, but more importantly still, I'd have found a way of communicating that budget in terms that could help businesses see that if not now, then tomorrow, this was a pro-business budget. And that wasn't done, and that led to the further leg down in business confidence.
Would you have spread the tax rises more evenly, I guess, among different taxes? Is that what you're saying?
Well, I mean, had it been me, actually the simplest route here, economically, if not politically, given what they'd said previously to the government, would be simply to reverse the NICS reductions the previous government had put in place, and which were clearly unaffordable given the budget envelope. That would have been the path of least resistance. I think would have listed far fewer raspberries than did the budget by business and by others as well.